Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's live stream. We are joined by a guest later on, but I'm going to kick things off as usual, looking at a few stories that have been in the news. There have been a lot of international stories that have attracted our attention recently, but I think the focus is coming back to Scotland, the UK and Scotland in particular, through this week. There's quite a lot of important topics coming up in the news for us. Right, I've just got the comments up on screen, so do fire comments in. It'd be good to interact as ever. Now, as I say, lots of different topics to talk about. So where shall we start? Let's have a look at my images here. Oh, this is an interesting one. The BMA, the British Medical Association, calls for trans teenagers to be prescribed puberty blockers. In other words, that they're disagreeing with the CAS review. The CAS review said there's not good evidence for prescribing puberty blockers to teenagers, so don't do it unless it's part of a controlled experiment. Which, to be honest, I've heard on different issues when they've made pronouncements on assisted suicide that the suggestions being made that they're very heavily influenced by sort of left-wing activists within them. Is that not the same with virtually every area of society? That people of a progressive bent become very influential, enter into organizations and institutions in order to promote their personal ideologies, are welcome with open arms, and they do that with total freedom. They end up getting paid to do it. So there's a significant amount of that going on within the BMA. So we shouldn't regard the BMA as the neutral voice of medical science. We should view it as a union. The same as we don't view the Educational Institute of Scotland as a neutral voice on educational policy issues. Anything but. It's a hyper-progressive, pretty hardline left-wing organization. And similar caveats should apply to advice from the BMA. So the CAS reviewers say, try to stop, but just rein in a little bit some of the excesses of the trans so-called treatments for kids. But there are significant forces pulling in the other direction. And with the UK Labour government, I think those significant forces will meet with more success. During the time of the Conservative government, it was open season for a long time. But in the last couple of years of the Conservative government, they just became very slightly conservative over a few issues, including this one. And they just started reining things in and rolling back a little bit. Too little, too late, as far as the electorate were concerned. But yeah, that was that. Oh, Carol, the connection's bad. Is that true? Let's cover a few second and third opinions on that. I'm not aware of any issues, but I might not be aware. So what does anyone else think? Right, what else have we got? Here, right, just quick mention of our conference, 9th of November. Last year's conference was our biggest ever. It was in Glasgow, just outside the city centre. It was just an afternoon, so Saturday afternoon, and into the early evening. There'll be a social event at the end of it. So I think people there at last year's would say, yep, for the feedback I had, they found it very inspiring. They enjoyed meeting all the people. It was very informative. So do come along to that if you possibly can. It would be great to see you, and who knows what that could lead to for you in the future. Now, big story of the week. Right, thanks for people saying there, yeah, the sound's okay. That's great. Big story this week, John Mason suspended. Now, John Mason has hung by a thread in the SNP for a significant number of years, I would suggest, it seems to me, because he's the most outspoken MSP by a mile. He's the most principled MSP by a mile. He's a Christian, and he puts forward, I would say, in a very extremely mild-mannered, reserved, careful, and diplomatic way, what he believes on some controversial issues. And this issue has been suspended about. I made a video about it, so I won't go into I won't recover the issues in that video. But just the background to it, Angus Robertson, well, the Israeli deputy ambassador asked for a meeting with the Scottish government. John Swinney said, Angus Robertson, you go and do it. And Angus Robertson went and did it. John Mason also met with this representative. I'm not quite sure how that came to pass, but he also met with her as well to have a conversation. Now, meeting with an ambassador, that doesn't mean, you're 100% backing the person or their nation or their policies or whatever. It's just you're willing to have a conversation with them. Now, the extreme anti-Israel wing of the SNP went berserk. That Angus Robertson had dared to have a meeting with a representative of Israel. So they went absolutely berserk, threw the toys out of the pram, demanded Angus Robertson's resignation, demanding John Swinney's resignation as well, because he agreed to this thing. So they're absolutely baying for blood. And so who's going to be the fall guy here? Who's going to be the scapegoat as far as the SNP is concerned? Who can they offer up as a sacrifice to appease their own baying mob? Well, no prizes for guessing. Obviously, it's going to be John Mason, isn't it? Now, with John Mason, people, there's the extreme anti-Israel fanatics, SNP supporters, but these same people, they're not too keen on John Mason already because he's pro-life, he opposed same-sex marriage, he opposed gender recognition reform, etc., etc., etc. So as far as they're concerned, he's a very bad person, regardless. But what happens with John Mason is people are out to get him. So whenever he says something that can be wrested out of context and pressed into service to sound ridiculous, it will happen to him. Now, this time, the SNP, I mean, they're all, the so-called debate in Parliament, they all stood up and said, Israel's committing genocide, 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 genocide. They'll all just repeat the same lines, genocide. Now, John Mason said on X, he said, well, I don't actually think that's an accurate description of Israel's behavior in Gaza. He said he thought Israel's actions at the moment were over the top. He did criticize Israel, but he said he thought genocide is not an appropriate term to use. There has been an international court charge of that nature, but it has not been resolved. There hasn't been a judgment given on it. So John's view, perfectly balanced, a perfectly balanced and reasonable view. Even if you disagree with him and think actually that what Israel's doing is covered by the definition of genocide, even if you actually think that, you still should be able to see that John Mason's view was a reasonably expressed, moderate position that someone could hold. So people went absolutely berserk. So the SNP has suspended him. Now, what will they do? Oh, once they suspended him, John Mason said, well, I still think what I think, and I'm not going to back down. That's what I believe. He didn't say it that straightforwardly, that provocatively, because he's not that sort of person. But he has said, it's what I believe, and I'm not changing. So the ball's really in the SNP's court over this one. And we will have to see what they will do. It'll probably drag on for a few months. He'll be suspended. My point to John Mason would be, I don't think he should be sitting there thinking, oh, the SNP going to let me back? Will they have me? Are they going to tolerate me? I would say he should be thinking, is he going to tolerate them? Can he be associated with this party? Can he promote this party anymore? And, well, you all know my answer to that, of course, would be no way. How can you support a party that's kills the unborn, corrupts children, promotes transgender ideology? To be honest, I think they've got a serious anti-Semitism problem as well. And that's illustrated or confirmed by the fact that John Mason's been suspended for making a perfectly reasonable comment. But, right, this is what I wanted to say about it tonight. How about the people who agree with John Mason? Now, I won't go over the details, but a little while ago, John Mason was giving a speech in the Parliament along similar lines, and people took a sentence out of it and tried to claim it was anti-Semitic, which was absolutely nuts, because he was one of about 2 MSPs who were actually more balanced in their comments. And the Scottish Council of Jews or something, I can't remember the exact name of the organization, they said, oh, this is really bad, that's anti-Semitism, which is very unwise of them, because John Mason was being one of the most balanced of the lot. So that organization, are they going to come out now and say, well, actually, well done, John, we agree with you, we're glad that you stood up and given a more balanced view on this issue? Will they do that? No. Just check their Twitter account. No sign of that yet. How about Jackson Carlaw? There's a lot of Jews in his constituency, and he tries to represent their views. So in the Parliament, he gave, I would say, the most pro-Israel speech in the debate. So will Jackson Carlaw come out and say, well, actually, what John Mason said was right. I largely agree with him. He shouldn't have been suspended by the SNP. Will he do that? No. I mean, Murdo Fraser, Jeremy Balfour, I will be amazed if they don't actually agree with John Mason. But will they say, quick post on X, I agree with what John said, shouldn't be suspended for that. Now, it wouldn't be disloyal to your party. That would be a way of attacking the SNP, wouldn't it? That's a way of disagreeing with the SNP. But they don't do it. They won't stand up for someone when they're in the firing line. And it really frustrates me. And then we've got Kate Forbes, who, virtually any interview you hear her in, she'll always be saying, oh, we know in the SNP, we need to be a broad church. We need to be a big tent. We need to allow people in with different views. That's the sort of party we need to be. And I think she's really keen to promote that line. And she's really keen that that's applied to her. But she's in the cabinet. So she's been involved in the decision to suspend John Mason over this. So it just seems like she's really keen on, don't give people a hard time because their views are a bit unorthodox. That's really bad. Don't do that. Let people have unusual views when it's me. When it's anyone else, well, don't expect me to speak up for them. I'm not going to say anything in their defense. They're on their own. And I fear that's the way it appears to me. And I do find this very frustrating because for me, just my instant reaction, if someone says something that I agree with, they're in hot water, first thing I want to do is say, yeah, that's what I think too. And I think when you're in hot water, that's what you most want. You want people to say, I agree with them. I agree with that person. I agree with you. But so in Scottish politics, they just won't do it. People just will not do it. I haven't scoured the newspapers assiduously over this. I don't think. There's an article in The Spectator, actually, when someone said, actually, I thought what he said was perfectly reasonable. But I haven't seen much more than that. So, yeah, interesting. We will see how this develops. He raised them. Oh, dear me, what an interesting picture. Raised them out of Amalek. Right, I don't understand that one. But, right, well done, John Mason, indeed. Yes. Reputation is all that matters to the majority of the SNP. I think certainly as far as our leadership is concerned, Gareth, I agree. You agree with John Mason? Absolutely. That's what we all should do. If you agree with someone, you should say so. Because that's the real antidote to cancel culture. It's for a mass of people to say, well, that's what I think too. Yeah, so we'll see how that develops in the future. How long will it take for this process? I think John himself in a newspaper article seemed to be, or was it the SNP? I don't know. But I think these things normally take months in any case to run their course. So who knows what will happen there. This is an interesting issue. I just put a post on X about this week. When I was at the Duns show in the summer, the talk of the show was that a local farm, lock, stock and barrel, the whole farm and all of its land had been bought by a company, and they were just basically going to cover it in trees. And there's going to be no food production whatsoever. And the reason they were doing that was to offset their carbon emissions of the wider business. So they could say their wider business was carbon neutral or met some sort of target or whatever. They were buying a farm and just foresting over the whole lot. Now, in my post I made on X, well, everywhere, all social media, I said this was, as it had been described to me by sort of local farmers, etc. This was prime agricultural land that had been transferred to woodland. Now, someone said subsequently, surely it wouldn't be prime agricultural land. That would make no economic sense. If you're going to cover something with trees, you wouldn't pick prime, most expensive agricultural land. So I've been looking into that. I don't know if there's a particularly precise definition of prime agricultural land, but certainly what was productive agricultural land of one sort or another is being forested over. Now, when it's forested over, I've also been reliably informed, sometimes that's for the forestry industry. So that helps supply our wood needs. So instead of needing to import wood, we will grow and use more of our own. But obviously, it reduces the amount of food produced in Scotland as well. Now, if you reduce the amount of food produced, what happens to food prices? Inevitably, they're going to go up. You're going to need to import more food. That's going to be more expensive. So food prices are going to go up. And also, I think food quality in Scotland is excellent. So it's not going to have a positive impact on food quality. I have to import more. And the other thing is resilience. I think a lot of nations are starting to think, the sort of one big happy family world where you can rely on getting your gas from Russia and things from China and chips from Taiwan or whatever. It's all fine. If it works this month, it'll work forever. Like a lot of the governments are thinking, well, we need to just have a second thought here. We need to think about how can we cope if things are not going so smoothly in the wider world. We need to be resilient. We need to be a bit more self-sufficient. So in terms of self-sufficiency, this idea of foresting over substantial areas of farmland, I'm very dubious about. So that's an issue we will follow. I've been doing a bit of research into it. It's pretty opaque. It's not easy to get to grips with exactly what's happening. One thing I have learned is the amount of forest land in Scotland is enormous. And compared with the rest of the UK, it's vastly greater areas that they're used for production and just woodland in general. I mean, Scotland really is the center of that. The other thing I've looked into this is always the same with climate change things. You can look at the amount of carbon in the atmosphere and the amount of carbon emissions per year, and you can look at what difference various steps make that governments can take. And you do the maths, and the results, well, the ones I've seen in any case, the results are basically the same. That the steps that you take make such an incredibly tiny difference. Like 0. Then the question is, how many zeros are there before you get a number? And is that many percent of worldwide emissions or the total carbon, amount of carbon in the atmosphere? That's not an argument for not doing things, but it's just being realistic about the numbers involved. I think with these things, it's easy to talk without numbers. Oh, we're doing this and it's reducing carbon emissions, and that's going to help with climate change. Everyone understands that. When you start putting numbers in, it can start sound like a different picture, and the amount of impact, well, it can be quite depressing actually. The amount of impact, even extremely drastic actions have very little impact. One of my favorite statistics, I think, is something like, if we stopped air travel completely, not a single airplane flew anywhere for any reason around the world, we stopped that completely now, by the year 2100, that would have delayed global warming or climate change by 3 weeks. Would have delayed climate change by 3 weeks. I mean, it's quite sobering, isn't it, to have a think about that. So the other things involved in this, there's the climate change thing. There's also the biodiversity thing. I haven't got my head around this. I haven't quite understood how it all works. But I think there are also incentives to, for example, turn your field into a wildflower meadow for the sake of biodiversity. So there's pressure in those directions as well. So I'm trying to get a better understanding of those. Okay, native forests provide cattle with their natural diet. Forests, I'm not sure forests provide cattle with their diet. Just going back to woodland as well, the way woodland affects climate emissions, because what it does basically is it takes large amounts of carbon and stores them within itself, and therefore can delay its release into the atmosphere for a very substantial length of time. But obviously, eventually, it does go back again. So again, its effectiveness is quite limited. I mean, from what I'm reading, it sounds like if you make all your furniture out of wood, then that's one of the most carbon emission friendly things. It's just make lots of things with wood, varnish it and keep it in your house forever, and then that's going to be the most helpful. But yeah, at the moment, I think the Scottish government is not getting things right in this regard. If companies are buying farms, foresting them over, so eliminating food output completely, merely in order to be able to get a tick in the box to cancel out what the rest of the business is doing, I think that's not helpful. So let's say that business has got a huge fleet of diesel trucks. It's trying to offset their carbon emissions. I'm saying, instead of doing that, if you're trying to do something, can you not try and do something about the trucks in some way, like directly, to actually reduce the carbon emitted, where it is actually coming out for real, rather than this like foresting over agricultural ground. So, yep. Yeah, if you import more food, the carbon footprint's offset adversely. Yes, absolutely. And I just don't get the impression they've thought that through. Reading these reports, I would have hoped they would be full of statistics and calculations that would be quite hard to understand, but they're not really. Most of it is descriptive text. It's not easy to understand exactly what's going on, but the sort of hard calculations and assessment of the other consequences doesn't seem to be there. So it's an interesting issue. I'm trying to get my head around it. I will keep working on it. A couple of people are helping as well who understand these sort of things. Right, some sad news from this week. I don't know if you saw this news. 2 schools closed, 2 independent schools. Let's talk about the one in the picture first. That's Kilgraston School, which was a Catholic girls' school up in Perthshire. When I was teaching in a boys' school, I went up there a couple of times for events. I always thought it seemed a really good school. Lovely country atmosphere. Yeah, really good. I don't know much about the values and the ethos, but I would assume it was pretty positive from my point of view. And then the other school was Cedars Christian School out in Greenock. That was an independent Christian school, but it was maybe sort of a bit bigger than a lot of the other ones. It went up into senior school as well. So in some ways, it seemed like, the model Christian, small independent Christian school in Scotland. So it's very, very disappointing to see it closed. But it was just a lack of pupil numbers and the forthcoming VAT on school fees that the Labour government has promised. So that will mean effectively, a 20% increase on the price, or, part of it could come from a reduction in the school budget. But basically, independent schools, almost all of them, they're not money-making machines. They're not profit-making institutions in any case. They're not businesses, but they're certainly not profitable enterprises. And so a change like that, a sort of 20% hit on their finances, is a major problem for them. And I think maybe particularly the boarding schools might be sort of on the edge a little bit with those. Their finances are a bit touch and go. So I wouldn't be surprised if more independent schools close over the next few years. I would imagine a boarding school or 2 will go as well, possibly bigger ones as well, rather than just smaller ones. Generally, the smaller independent schools have already gone. There used to be far more independent schools in Scotland. I mean, I could rattle through a list of quite a few that have closed in recent decades. So the minnows have generally gone already. So I think it will be some more established, larger schools that might be in trouble. Family party policy, 2 issues here. I mean, first of all, these 2 schools, parents are choosing and they want to have their children educated according to their own values. So they chose these particular schools, but the Labour Party thinks, no, we're not so keen on that. And the Labour government, just like the SNP, Labour and SNP, they're so similar. Part of their attitude is, all children need teaching the one true truth, which is our values, because they are the one true set of values, and every child needs educating according to the state's orthodoxy. And so they don't want them in independent schools. And then there's also this envy thing as well. They think, it's unfair. But the thing from a charity point of view is it a good for your nation to produce highly educated, well-mannered, well-behaved citizens? Is that a good for the nation? Well, obviously it is. So the family point of view is any institution that endeavors to produce citizens of that nature should be a charity. Because not only are they saving money from the state system, but also that they're endeavoring to produce citizens of the type that the nation needs. Just while we're on the topic, actually, people talk about the injustice of independent schools. From data I've seen, in any case, independent schools don't really make that much difference to academic attainment. There's the idea that you have these small classes and extra attention, so you get much better exam results. I think overall, actually doesn't make much difference. In the younger ages, it might make a significant difference, but by the time you're through to Nat 5's highers, advanced highers, A levels, or whatever, basically underlying brain power wins out, whatever sort of school you're in. So I think the academic benefits of independent schools are not as great as people imagine. They often get far higher average exam results, but that's because of the quality of the pupils going into them, not so much because of the quality of the education. There are lots of other aspects of education apart from exam results, of course. I'm just talking about that one particular area. So knocking my microphone over there. Right, let's have a look what other issues we've got. I'll bring on our guest very soon. Right, what on earth is happening in the Scottish Conservative Party? Well, my answer is I don't really know. I haven't got my head around it all. But it really seems like people have been very happy to turn on Douglas Ross. In a quite forthright manner, let's put it that way. I mean, he really is out of favour. And I suppose it's a credit to them. They've managed to present such a united front with all of this tension and hostility bubbling below the surface. But it really is not below the surface anymore. Now, the new Scottish Conservative leader will attempt to bring things back together. But it's just been enlightening to see that a party that appeared to be, on an even keel, working quite harmoniously, when you see what's under the surface, I mean, it really was, not far off, warfare in there, real severe tensions and ill feeling there. So that's sure been interesting. Now, I'm not sort of trying to make a big thing of it. I'm just saying it's been interesting to see that what's on the surface isn't necessarily what's underneath. MPox is back on the scene. Now, I have to be careful what I say about this. I made a subject when this was called monkey pox. Was a couple of years ago, and it was around. And I made this very same point in a Scottish Family Party video, which YouTube deleted, banned it. It said it was hate speech or something, which was crazy because there were lots of people making exactly the same point I was making about it. But for some reason, they picked on my video. But again, with this time, the same point has come up. The World Health Organization has declared it a global health emergency, very concerned about it. There's been a case in Scandinavia, hasn't there? That's the first one in Europe. I mean, so who knows? It might spread quickly, it might not, I'm not sure. A significant amount of the spread is through sexual contact, and the previous version of it was particularly men having sex with men. That was the characteristic then. I don't know to what extent that's still the case now. But what really frustrates me is you look at the advice, and the advice is always for MPox now, the official advice, get tested, all that sort of thing. Check for symptoms, go and see your doctor if you're worried, all this sort of thing. The advice they will not give, they will not say, don't be sexually promiscuous. Don't maybe think about having sex with less partners. Maybe don't have sex with anyone for a period or whatever. But this sort of, they will not give that advice. It's as though there's some fundamental principle that means you just cannot say to people, it would be a good idea to not have sex with so many people. And contrast that with COVID, when they were happy to say, stop going to the pub, don't meet your friends, don't go to church, don't go to weddings, don't go to funerals, don't go to the shop, don't go anywhere. In other words, any aspect of your life, we'll interfere with it and tell you not to do it. But oh no, once it's a primarily sexually transmitted disease, you cannot say, well, maybe be a bit cautious about having sex. You cannot say that. I mean, I just think it's utterly bizarre that people can be so dogmatic to be able to act like that when lives are at stake. Basically, that's the thing, isn't it? And lives are at stake here. They're trying to offer people advice to prevent them from catching what seems like potentially very, very serious illness, and they will not offer the advice that will best help people to avoid this very, very serious illness. I mean, World Health Organization, I don't think so. But when the NHS in Scotland and England and Wales, I would imagine their advice will be exactly the same. They will not grasp the nettle and actually address the obvious issue and issue the obvious advice. Right, there, Bruce. Limiting sexual partners is advice, but they won't give that advice with regard to MPox. They listed about 4 or 5 things, advice to give to people, but that was not in it. That was not in it, which is my point. Okay, I think it's time to bring in our special guest. So let us welcome John MacArthur. Welcome, John.
Good evening, Richard.
Right,
good evening, all.
As you're not familiar with John, I mean, John was a candidate for us in the election in Rutherglen. John was a deputy head teacher until relatively recently. John, tell us a bit more about yourself before we launch into our topic.
Well, I was a teacher for over 40 years, and I actually retired and then sort of wanted to hang on and went back doing a bit of supply here and there. And I learnt a few interesting things a few years after I retired about the school I had been in and how things were changing, even within a school that had previously, I felt, had been very tightly run. And that made me want to say something about education in Scotland and the way things are going. I think we have a major problem in our education in Scotland, and I think we really need to work on a remedy. It's desperately needed. So with that in mind, I first of all, I should say that I really like the family party's reform in education policy. I think it's an excellent policy on the whole, but there's a little bit of it that I was just unhappy with. And so after the election, I wrote a proposal, a suggestion about a slight change in our policy document with regards education. And I have my suggestion here in front of me. And if you'd like me to talk about that just now, Richard.
Yes, yeah, I've got the relevant passage on screen as well. But yeah, fire away.
Right. Well, basically, if anyone has the policy with them, it's at the third page of the reform in education section. Richard has the relevant bit on screen. You see the brown box at the bottom there. It says in the box there that the teaching of how to think would contrast with the current emphasis on telling pupils what to think. Now, if I start with that, that made me slightly uneasy, because those of us with a long enough memory will know that curriculum for excellence was sold with much the same statement. We're going to teach people how to think rather than what to think. And of course, the way that it was interpreted by those who came up with curriculum for excellence was that we'll just empty out the curriculum, so there's no content left. So we're not, and they said that's us not teaching the pupils what to think. So now they can learn how to think. But of course, that's a soundbite, and it's said for effect more than for meaning. And that troubled me, because the reality is, in all my experience as a teacher tells me that when pupils are young, and for a substantial part of their primary schooling and the early part of their secondary schooling, they really do need to be told what to think. Because you can't learn how to think unless you have some knowledge to work on. Thinking skills are not learned in a vacuum. And so that troubled me. Now, this, if I just can read out a little bit from my submission so that I can give people an idea of what I'm thinking of. During the formative years, I think it's vital that parents and teachers delineate wholesome values and moral righteousness for their children. And the problem at present is that in some schools, there are certain bad actors who are misleading our children by telling them to think in a way which is contrary to the Judeo-Christian values which we had previously accepted as beyond dispute. Now, in the formative years, children must absorb a body of clear factual information with particular emphasis on, and I've picked out these subjects: history, religious instruction, science, and geography. Now, in addition, they need a simultaneous development of skills in language, mathematics, technology, art, and music. That's highly desirable and advantageous to have those kind of skills. It's only after acquiring a solid groundwork on this basic content that it is possible for a student to begin to learn how to think in any meaningful way. And that's the basis of my argument here. We cannot learn how to think in the absence of necessary basic knowledge. So, and as I said earlier, thinking skills are not learned in a vacuum. The problem with what I'm suggesting here is, of course, many people will immediately oppose that in the wider world. They'd say, oh no, you can't impose your religious views on every child. But if we don't take a stand in this, what actually happens is, if you take God out of school, if you take our values out of school like that, immediately into the vacuum, into the space rushes the values of the other lot, that the LGBTQ and all the other stuff that comes in and replaces the Christian values. So we cannot surrender that ground. We've got to have our children having their education based on sound values. So we have to fight this, and we have to point out these are not just religious values. These are the values on which the whole of Western civilization was based, and they stood us in good stead for so long. We cannot abandon them, and we can't let these other forces usurp the basic values that have helped us for so long. And that will be the main fight, because they'll try to accuse us of imposing religious views on everyone and every child, and they'll say that's not right. They'll point to the fact that now we have a substantial Muslim population, and they won't be happy to have Judeo-Christian values. But I beg to differ with that. I went back to one of my old schools, and it was a Catholic school, and there were lots of Muslim children had joined the school, and I was very curious about this, and I was asking around, especially the senior Muslim children, why have you come to a Catholic school? What made your parents choose a Catholic school? And basically, they said their parents decided that they were more likely to be taught good values in the Catholic school than in the state school. And so I found that interesting. I think a lot more of the Muslim populace would be happy for the reinstatement of the basic Christian values into our schools than they might be given credit for. So I don't think the Muslim population would be an obstacle for these values to come in. In any case, many of the values we're talking about are important to Muslims too. And so I think we shouldn't have a problem there. I think our main problem would be with the atheists and the left-wing people who are trying to corrupt our children, as we can see with the sex education program, which is corrupting young minds. I think another thing I believe is that we have to start taking responsibility as adults. A young person needs to have an adult in their life, or adults in their life, to be authoritative and responsible and trustworthy. And our children rely on us for clear boundaries and direction. And it's counterproductive to continually consult children all the time for their opinions and their preferences. I was very pleased to hear that the head teacher down in London, is it Mrs. Balba Singh, I think her name is, and she was talking about this, and she agrees with me about you do teach children what to think. She had an interview with Jordan Peterson, and she said that, and I thought, oh, exactly. I'm really glad you agree with me. And she runs a very successful school, but she made it very clear: if you continually consult children for their opinions and their preferences, it's a recipe for discontent, and you give them unwarranted feelings of entitlement, and that is undermining for children. It's destabilizing. I think we've got a big fight ahead of us. I think there's probably nothing more important in Scotland just now than reforming education. And I think we have to think really seriously about how we're going to put things together and get this going. With regard to curriculum for excellence, it's been a big mistake, a backward step. In England, they have a lot of the same disciplinary problems in schools and problems with people abandoning the values, just the same as we have in Scotland. But what they do not have is such a massive dip in the overall educational performance that we have here in Scotland. And why is that? I think it's to do with Michael Gove a while back insisted that they do not abandon norm reference testing and the sort of maintenance of standards that that has stood them in good stead in the last 10 years or so. Whereas in Scotland, with curriculum for excellence, we have abandoned this. We've taken the progressive route and we've undermined all the good work that has been done in the past. So we in Scotland, we have a longer way back than they have in England. They still have their problems, but they're not in as bad a condition as we are here in Scotland. We really have a lot to do. And we've made a dreadful start with the new government putting 20% on of VAT on the independent schools. That doesn't help anything. And it's I don't see, I'm not optimistic that they will be sympathetic to anything that I'm saying. So
No.
if other than that, I think our education policy is terrific, and I wouldn't change anything there. There's one other thing. Just before that box, the sentence above, lessons in critical thinking, epistemology and logic, unrelated to contemporary political bits. I think I'd like to have that removed as well, because I think critical thinking will be arrived at through things like the study of literature, the really good pieces of literature. Then it can latch on to things that are relevant to the pupils that they're doing then. His studies in history, what was the right thing for this king to do or that parliament to do at that time. That's how I think you tackle critical thinking. I don't think we need that paragraph either. So the last two the box and the paragraph above it, I'd like to remove and to put maybe something else in its place. I could write a proposal for, if people agreed with me, to put in there, or nothing. You might decide simply to remove it, and that would be enough. But maybe it needs qualification. All right.
Yeah, right. Lots of interesting things there. But just to respond to this issue, looking at what's looking at what's on the screen in general there, I think the problem with that in our policies, I think it's in the wrong place. So when it says this, teaching how to think will contrast with the current emphasis on telling people what to think. I think that phrase, that sentence there, it's not supposed to be talking about the academic curriculum. I know it's in that section, but it's not talking about what happens in maths and English and all these topics. I think our policies there, I think they make it clear, that they need to learn facts. This idea that, pupils are not empty vessels in need of filling up, that just gets repeated so many times in schools. I think in terms of knowledge, that's absolutely what they are. That children need to learn facts about things. But I think the bit in the box there, it's specifically talking about critical thinking, epistemology, logic, those sort of things. Now, if you imagine that sentence transferred to the bit where you think about, political issues, social issues, I think that's where it's targeted. Because at the moment, what will happen, that there'll be a lesson that's designed to be, we're going to learn about thinking skills or social issue or whatever, but it will really, really biased on an area, because particularly with older children, there are some areas where they shouldn't just be taught what to think. They should look at different sides of the argument and make their own mind up. if you think about, most political issues, for example, if you're doing like advanced higher modern studies or whatever, then you should learn about critical thinking in those subjects. But what tends to happen is the way it's delivered is it's alongside the teaching of critical thinking and logic. Alongside it is a really strong sort of political bias or sort of progressive bias. So I think what the policy is saying is when it's dealing with that sort of issues, we want to take away the bias and just teach them how to be able to assess arguments without, like, if you said to Scottish schools, design a course about logic, there would come up a course where it would say, spot the flaws in Donald Trump's speech. And list 5 strengths in Kamala Harris's policy manifesto. I mean, that's what it would be. They wouldn't be able to resist making it biased. I think I'd maybe disagree about the idea of having explicit lessons in critical thinking. I think doing literature and history and all these other subjects, you would hopefully learn critical thinking with those. But I would tend to think that learning it explicitly, and like the rules of logic, for example, I think learning those explicitly can be valuable. Do you think, or not? You're confident that through other subjects is the way to go?
I think I think it can be valuable, but for older pupils, I think we're talking about seniors here who could do logic and critical thinking most effectively. There are clearly some able students further down the school who could do it too, but the general population of pupils, I think only the older ones could learn critical thinking skills freestanding, as it were, separate from other information in the curriculum. But I think that the children will develop their critical thinking abilities at different stages as they go through. And you'd hope, it's probably true that few of them would have developed those skills in the early secondary. And you would hope that the majority of them would have started to develop the skills by the time they got to the top end of the school. And somewhere in the middle, they develop these skills, we hope. I don't want to be hard and fast about saying it has to be done through literature or through history or through religious instruction, but I think it's best done that way, because then issues arise kind of naturally. I know I was an English teacher. Sometimes you do a particular poem and it throws up issues, and the discussion goes off in a way that you might not have quite expected. But if you see it's productive, you let it go, and that can be really, really very good for the whole class. Not only the ones doing the talking and chipping in, but the ones listening to what's going on. And you can cover a lot of ground sometimes just from a simple poem that raises issues. So there's ways of doing that can be very effective.
Yeah, I remember once a math lesson I was teaching to, what would it be, 11 or 12-year-olds. And I said to them, every square is a rectangle, but not every rectangle is a square. And half of the class just said, that doesn't make sense. That's stupid. That's not right. What do you mean? That can't be true. I said, no, just listen to it. Every square is a rectangle, but not every rectangle is a square. And they argued with me for a significant amount of time. I think eventually they sort of realized the penny dropped. And the other thing you get is you say, in general, men are stronger than women. But then someone will think that means that Peter's stronger than Jane. I think just learning principles like that, really focused. But the moment it doesn't happen, I actually taught A-level critical thinking for a little while. I think it was actually really helpful, because you see we're talking boys who are 17, 18 years old, and things like that. Men are stronger than women, therefore Peter is stronger than Jane. You get people say, well, yeah, that makes sense, doesn't it? If men are stronger than women, Peter must be stronger than Jane. To me, that's such a fundamental intellectual skill, ability, whatever,
Yeah.
I think really teaching those explicitly and assessing them to make sure they've got the message and they've got to grips with those things. I think that certainly in my experience, I found it valuable for myself studying like the laws of logic explicitly rather than like picking it up through studying other things. But I say, but the how to think rather than what to think, I think that's in terms of, I think that sentence is in the wrong place. I think where it should be maybe is in this section. So in values education, it says virtues such as courage, integrity, faithfulness, loyalty, gratitude, politeness, prudence, temperance, generosity, compassion, humility, tolerance should be at the heart of character formation in schools. Instead, most Scottish schools tirelessly promote a liberal, progressive, leftist agenda, taking every opportunity to present this perspective on issues such as climate change, sexism, feminism, race, inequality, gender, sexuality, and the like. The extent of this promotion of particular perspectives amounts to indoctrination. Once children's views have been molded, a charade of listening to children enables the adults to claim that they're merely following the direction of children. If a one-size-fits-all education system is prescribed, then it needs to include diverse perspectives and engender open debate on controversial topics. Currently, a uniform philosophy is presented to the exclusion of others.
Right.
Oh,
and then you put the box in there after that. Yeah.
Possibly. Yeah.
Yeah, that would make much better sense. I think that would be a big improvement. I would agree with that. Yeah.
I was thinking about it in terms of this. There's the academic curriculum, and this idea that you're not going to teach facts or whatever. That's obviously nonsense. And we talked about teaching critical thinking one way or another, implicitly or explicitly. We talked about values education as well. You were saying about teaching moral values. The research I did in the school where I worked demonstrated that the boys came in with very strong and firm moral values. And as they progressed through the school, their moral values became more and more permissive, even on things like, is it okay to steal things? If you ask a 10-year-old, it absolutely is not. If you ask an 18-year-old, well, it just depends, it's up to you. So, the values just got worse going through that. So I think, as you're saying, teaching these fundamental values is absolutely vital. I mean, if schools don't see that as part of their function in order to produce good citizens, then whatever are they thinking? What are they thinking? Well, I'll tell you what they're thinking. They're thinking if you just help them to make their own mind up, then they'll come to all the right conclusions themselves, and it'll all be great. But it doesn't work out.
Yeah. Okay. That sounded to me, Richard. That sounded like a really good compromise to move that box into a more appropriate place. Other than that, then I think that current policy is very sound and doesn't need. I don't think needs much tweaking. What we need, though, is just action to carry through the necessary reforms in Scottish education. Yeah, but that's a good base to go from.
Yeah, but the thought going through my head as we're doing this, if we had a representative from the Reform Party here, what's your policy for Scottish education? What's your policy on education, even in the UK? How much detail? It's just a few bullet points. It's nothing. It's nowhere near as well thought through and thorough or whatever as ours is. But in politics, having brilliant policies is of limited value sometimes. But we've got to communicate them and be known for them, etc. But so thanks very much for bringing that point up. That was an interesting discussion. That was helpful to have a look at that policy again. Do you want to hang around and look at some of the other issues we've got?
Yes, I'd be delighted to do that. Yeah.
Right, we have some good comments coming in here. Someone was saying about independent school. Someone sending their kid to independent school because they saw what happened with the other children in a local state school. Right, that's a very good point. Yep, John, kids are being taught what to think in some areas where they, where it fits the bias, which is exactly what we're saying here. Tirelessly promote liberal, progressive, leftist agenda. On some areas, this is quite a grey area. At a school, if you want to do a lesson on assisted suicide, I think even in a Catholic school, I don't think you'd want the lesson to be, right, this lesson is about why assisted suicide is a bad idea, and I'm going to persuade you, particularly for older students. You'd want them to understand the arguments, and you'd hope that once they understand the arguments, that you can explain, that they're going to come to their own conclusion. The teacher can argue for their own point of view as well. But at the moment, when it comes to like values in line with the Scottish government, the children are just taught them as fact, right from primary school onward, with no messing around at all. Right, there are some appreciation for you there, John. Right, evening. Parents will have to be very attentive to make up for what's lacking in this regard in school. Yeah, absolutely. I think if children are the type who come home and you say, what did you do at school today? And you can have a half-hour conversation over the meal table, that's great. When your children get to the stage where you say, what did you do at school today? They'll say nothing. It gets a bit more difficult. Anyway, let's progress. Right, this was an interesting. Well, this is just going back to the riots in England, Wales a little while ago. This was a lady who posted on X. It's absolutely ridiculous. Don't protect the mosque. Blow the mosque up with the adults in it. Now, obviously, I mean, that is an appalling thing to say. And you could also, I mean, that's an incitement as well. I'm not sure I would say that's serious incitement. I'm not sure it's the sort of thing that is likely to lead to someone actually going to do it. But I think if the police came and knocked on the door of that lady, I think I would be saying yes. So that is incitement to violence. So when you've got the likes of Elon Musk saying, "Oh, in Britain now the police come and knock at your door for a tweet," tyranny. Well, you can put all sorts of things in a tweet. You can put a death threat in a tweet, and the police will come and knock at your door. The fact that the police come and knock at your door because of a tweet is not the mark of tyranny. It depends what that tweet was. And this, I would think, incitement. I would be, I think the police should be involved in that. But the thing I wanted to bring up is that this lady has been sentenced. It's not on the screen. It's been sent to jail. Was it 2 years or something? I forget the exact sentence. It might have been, say, 2 years. Wow, does that seem a bit harsh, John? What do you think?
It certainly does, and of course, I'm further concerned about the inconsistency, because I can think of instances on the other side where far worse incitement is apparent and nothing seems to have been done about it. I'm thinking of the Hope Not Hate group, who put out that there were white supremacists going around throwing acid in the faces of Muslims, and that information went all around the country before they withdrew it. Now, why aren't the people in Hope Not Hate not up in court for that? I don't want them to be sent to prison for it, but I don't think anyone should be sent to prison for a message on social media.
The fellow from Hope Not Hate, what he said was not true. People who said things that are not true, sort of on the other side, if you like, have been arrested. So there's definitely an inconsistency. I think this post is worse because it's incitement. Yeah, I think if we if I came round to meet you tonight and we went out and try and find someone to beat up, we would have to try pretty hard to get sent to prison for something. You really have to do a lot more than like go up to someone in the street and give them a punch. You've really got to make a decent effort to assault someone to get yourself in prison. And yet that tweet landed her in prison. I think it was maybe 2 years or something. It just seems, as I say, appalling thing that she wrote on. Absolutely appalling. And I'm quite happy that the police come and knock on her door. But sent to prison for a year or two, that seems out of proportion So
It's,
the punishments
yeah,
for other
I
crimes.
agree. It's completely out of proportion. And there are a few others who have encountered something similar. So, I think the fact that it's easy to find out about all of these, I think it's partly sort of pour encourager les autres to put a chilling effect on people putting messages on social media, and it's probably worked. I would be willing to bet there are tens of thousands of people who have held back with a social media post on the strength of saying what's happening.
Yeah,
and that's
I think it's fine. I mean, if the woman, I mean, let's say she'd been fined, say, fined £500. I don't know. Then I think that would hopefully have a deterrent effect. But yeah, it just seemed excessive. Right, let's go to a few other things. I've got right. This is something interesting I've been looking into. I've written a document about this, which I'll publish before the weekend. I'll maybe do it in video form as well. But the buffer zone law has been passed in Scotland, so it's already been passed. I don't know the exact terminology, but it's not actually active law yet. So you can't actually be arrested for breaking the law. But it might become active at any moment. No, people are unsure when it's going to happen. So the question for people who are engaged in the vigils at abortion clinics is what you do. Do you say, oh, it's illegal now, so we're going to stop? Or do you say, I have a responsibility, a moral responsibility, a calling, or whatever you want to put it, to continue to do this because it's so important, therefore I will carry on. Now, I think, there are certainly some people in Scotland who are minded to carry on. And so I've written about all the people who take part in the vigils are Christians. So I've written it from a Christian perspective, looking at the arguments about whether or not this is a case where breaking the law is justified. I think from a Christian point of view, there are definitely cases where breaking the law is justified. If the law commands something that's wrong, or commands that you don't do something that's right, that is demanded by God, then you have to break the law. And that's a pretty well established principle. So I was trying to look in some depth at this issue to come to a conclusion. And the reason I'm doing it, obviously, it's not some sort of abstract academic exercise. It's because people are going to be in the position of making this decision very soon. I mean, potentially, who knows? It could be next week, for all we know. The group in Glasgow go every week. So 3 times a week. So the moment this law becomes active, they'll be in the firing line. So I won't go into the details of it now, but just I will publish this in writing and in video form before the end of the week. Have you got any view on that, John, about what should happen?
I think every individual must make up their own mind. It's a serious step to go against the law, regardless of how unjust that law may be. And I wouldn't be criticizing anyone who pulled back from the vigils or anything like that because they didn't want to get in trouble with the law. But at the same time, I'd be 100% behind anyone who felt in principle they wanted to carry on. I don't know if they started to arrest people for that. I'm wondering what we would do about it. On the whole, would we try to get numbers to go and go there in even larger numbers the next week and the next week? I think we'd have to make some sort of stand.
Well, that's the thing. That's like the dream scenario, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where you just get more and more people doing it, and it becomes unmanageable. The other possibility is they'll think, maybe people the first time they'll get a fine, maybe quite a modest fine, but I think they'll ramp things up pretty dramatically, not just for that person, but if they realize this is being ignored, then I think they will ramp up the penalties, partly because of political pressure as well. The top of the legal system is basically related to the government one way or another, and they will know that for the government this is a real top priority and they've got to stamp it out. So I think they will really ramp up the penalties, and we'll just have to see where it goes. Maybe the first few people who get arrested, maybe that'll become a news story. The media will be totally hostile to the pro-life activists.
Yeah,
but maybe the media will just lose interest. Then it's new territory. in Britain for a lot of people, a lot of pro-life activists. It is uncharted territory. I think for churches as well. How's the church going to respond when one of your members, might even end up in prison? How are they going to respond to that? Again, I'll come back to what I was saying earlier. I think what people want or need in those situations is public affirmation. We think you did the right thing. Well done. We're on your side. That's what's going to be needed. So, how much of that would there be? We shall have to see.
I think the rest of us would have to put pressure on politicians, if we possibly could, contacting them and telling them to speak up against this or whatever. We'd have to have some sort of concerted campaign. We couldn't let people be picked off one by one and punished with heavy fines and things like that, and which I think would be the road to go down. Incidentally, Richard, did you see in the news that the lady in England who won £13,000 in damages for being arrested for praying quietly, silently in the street? They seem to be going in a different direction.
Well, that was, England and Wales, they've introduced a similar law that is isn't active yet. I think the general election delayed it. So their new law isn't active. So that her previous arrest was under a local law, so bylaw. I don't know the detail. I don't follow it particularly closely in England. But England and Wales's general law is going to come into force very soon. But Scotland's law is vague. It's unclear what it means. It's influencing that is the crime. So if a couple of you are standing there praying like undemonstratively, are you trying to influence? Well, it'll be up to the sheriff to decide whether or not a person passing by, seeing two people standing on the other side of the road, would reasonably conclude that they were pro-life activists, and therefore that might the people standing there might be thinking that being recognized as pro-life activists might influence a person's decision making. Good luck with the sheriffs with that. The law is dreadfully drawn. But without stealing my own thunder, though, I think a key aspect of the visuals is offering help, is to challenge people, because sometimes women or a woman and a man together are going to the clinic to get an abortion, and it does happen. I'm not saying it's common, but it does happen that they change their mind because they see the vigil and it challenges them, and they think about it, and they change their mind, and a life is saved at that point. So I think if it goes to praying in a way that people don't even know you're there, then that's taken away one of the key elements. Whereas standing with a placard saying, we can help, or a woman with a placard saying, ask me about my abortion or something, I say that's quite a key element. But anyway, I'll publish something later on. Let's keep cracking on. Yeah, this is an interesting one. Those of you who follow Glasgow Cabby, you'll have seen he was planning to have some sort of anti-mass and illegal immigration event. I'll just say that again to make sure it's clear. Anti-mass immigration and illegal immigration. And he's going to have an event in George Square. He's been publicizing this for a while. Now, the family party won't be involved in this for a number of reasons, one of which it will tend to be seen as an extension of the disorder in England. It's likely to attract some people who might make it into an extension of the disorder. It's likely to attract a potentially violent counter-protest. And I think the issue itself is such a minefield that if you're in among 8 other speakers, if another speaker doesn't quite hit the right note or says something that's a bit out of order, then I think it's just very difficult to manage. So we've got a lot of views about immigration, but it's a minefield that's extremely sensitive. So we've decided that sort of outdoor gathering isn't the way we want to address these issues. So we're not taking part in it. But it was interesting. A couple of Glasgow councillors effectively called for vigilante action to come and deal with these protesters if the protest went ahead. This, which I thought was pretty irresponsible of them, really irresponsible. You despair at the quality of our local politicians, if they can't realize that that's totally out of order to be trying to incite citizens to come and take the law into their own hands like that. It's
that would surely come under the heading of incitement to violence, vigilantism.
Yes.
But
but we can be. I'm sure they're not trembling in their bed, worried about a knock on the door from the police at the moment. I'm sure they'll be fine. But yeah, we're talking about the police being a bit partial. This is an interesting one. This was a pro-Palestine campaigners. I think attacked is not too strong a word. A weapons equipment factory or something in Scotland, and they've been sent to jail for it. I think it was four of them. Yeah, were sent to jail because they caused over £1 million worth of damage, and the staff had to be evacuated. They were firing fireworks round, including towards the areas where the staff were evacuated to. So the judge was pretty severe about it, and they have been jailed for it. So they've got all this talk about, two-tier policing or whatever. I think it's important to keep a sense of perspective as well. I think this bunch here, I would say they've got what they deserved. They deserve to go to prison for that, and they have done. I mean, I would have feared that because this is the sort of cause that the Scottish government's actually quite keen on this, I could sort of agree with them, and the police know that, that this is the right sort of protest. But as I say, appropriate sentences do seem to have been handed down. So I guess that's good news. I mean, drug deaths, yet again, it's an annual ritual in Scotland, isn't it? They announced the tragic drug death statistics. Utterly appalling, worst in Europe. The Scottish government, the whole Scottish Parliament, I would say, they just don't know how to respond to it. But the Scottish government, they still say the real issue is stigma. If we can just deal with stigma, then it'll all be fine. It's like the MPox issue. They will not say, stop doing the dangerous thing. They will not say that. But they'll give all sorts of peripheral advice. But then with other things, they're very, like they say, diabetes, they'll say, stop eating so much sugar. Get more exercise, do this, do that. But then when it comes to drugs, or even alcohol, they'll say, drink less, right? Smoking, stop smoking, just stop smoking. Then it comes to drugs, well, we're not here to tell you what to do. It's people who stigmatize you. That's the real issue. They're the real problem. They're the ones really causing the harm. I mean,
yeah, there's another aspect to this, Richard, as well. Quite a lot of these drug deaths are older addicts, many of them who are now on programs like the methadone program, and their drug use over many years has caught up with them, and they're dying younger than they ought to. But they're still sort of middle-aged addicts, and they're not out injecting and things anymore. But it's just the past is catching up in so many of them, and a lot of the deaths are down to that. It's quite a complicated picture, I think.
I feel like I've been hearing that line for a long time, though.
Yeah.
Do you feel that? This idea that this is going to pass through the system. We've got a lot of addicts who are basically on the road to an early grave. But once this cohort, speaking callously, is gone or whatever, then things are going to be better then. But I assume it feels like I've been hearing that for a long time. I don't know. I mean, in the Parliament, this is one where you would think the Conservatives would be, wanting a bit more of a crackdown, a bit of a tougher approach, but a sort of moral approach to it. But they're really not. It's all more support, more rehabilitation, which is fine. That's all good, but it's not getting into the heart of the matter, which is it's a values issue, it's a moral issue, and that's the core of the problem. No matter how difficult someone's situation is, no matter how tempted they might be by drugs, the stronger their values, the stronger their moral revulsion to it, the better a position they'll be in. And I think that side is just not not represented. It's Gareth, how do we stop drugs in younger people? Yeah, it's a very serious issue. I think the education in most schools is pretty dire. It's an amoral education. And I think with vapes, I think the main problem, as far as I'm concerned, is just getting people into the habit that it's normal to live your life while managing addictions. You take on an addiction and you manage that, and that's just a normal part of life. And I think once you've sort of broken that barrier, like broken the taboo, then it just seems more natural to take on, to try something else and to, to manage that and see how it goes. It's just, yeah, it's disastrous. Anyway, but that's back to where I got up to. So we've made it. Oh no, I've got one video to show you. Oh yeah, we'll just finish on this. ChatGPT. I had a chat with ChatGPT earlier on. And I asked it about Glasgow Cabby, Steph Shaw. And most of you will be familiar with Glasgow Cabby as a social media figure campaigner. And we've worked with Steph Shaw, Glasgow Cabby, on a few things. We've worked with him on the sex education issue, protested about the Scottish Government's sex education. We've worked with him on the freedom of speech issue, about the hate crime law. And currently, as I say, he's looking at sort of anti-illegal and mass immigration issue as well. So I put into ChatGPT, I said, who's Glasgow Cabby? And it gave a really vague answer. Then I said, right, it's Steph Shaw. And ChatGPT, the AI system, said, it's a popular figure on social media, particularly Twitter. Well, that's wrong. Shares his thoughts, stories, observations, and his experiences as a taxi driver in Glasgow. Gained a following for his witty, insightful, and often humorous takes on life in Glasgow, as well as his commentary on current events, politics, and local culture. Okay, fine, fair enough. So I corrected and I said, well, he's actually most active on Facebook. And ChatGPT said, oh, yeah, okay, fair enough. You're right. It is on Facebook. Right, let's just get the next bit. Oh, whoa. What's going on here? All right, so I said, what issues has he campaigned on? And ChatGPT said he's campaigned on homelessness, mental health awareness, local community support, traffic and road safety. Now, I think they're all true. I think. I'm not aware of what the road safety thing is, but let's assume they're all true. It's okay, that's fine. So I said to ChatGPT, I said, has he campaigned about sex education? And ChatGPT said, yes, he has. I said, has he campaigned about immigration? And ChatGPT said, yes, he has. I said, has he campaigned about freedom of speech? And ChatGPT said, yes, he has. So I said to ChatGPT, I said, why didn't you mention sex education, freedom of speech, and immigration campaigning in that list you gave to me? And this is what ChatGPT said. It said, I initially focused on issues like homelessness, mental health awareness, local community support, and traffic road safety, because these are common areas of advocacy that are often highlighted in public discussions about local figures like Steph Shaw. However, I did not mention his campaigning on sex education, freedom of speech, and immigration initially, because these issues tend to be more polarizing and might not be as broadly emphasized in general descriptions of his activism, which is bunk, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So ChatGPT was saying, I ask about Glasgow Cabby, and ChatGPT, I say, what issues does he campaign on? And it gives me a list, but it deliberately misses out the contentious issues. And I think that's a little bit sinister. So let's say you've got some sort of public figure who might be, say, pro-life. If you put into ChatGPT, what issues do they campaign on? You're not going to get pro-life in there because that's a bit contentious. You'll get probably, climate change, poverty, and cancer research or something. Entirely uncontroversial ones. So it's biased against controversial views. Now, which views does it class as controversial? Well, probably ours. I would guess. So I might do a bit more research with ChatGPT and have a look. Maybe I could do some live. Can I do it live? I'm not sure technologically I can do it live during the live stream. But I'll see. Maybe I can next week. But I'll maybe do a bit more and see if we can pin down what seems to be a bit of a bias in ChatGPT there. This is interesting. I found that with ChatGPT, sometimes it gives an answer that's very standard, official type, towing the party line type thing. But then when you push it, you'll get it to give a more open or a more nuanced or whatever view. It will pick up some of the things that will be a bit more controversial when you ask it to. But if you don't ask it to, it stays away. So do you use ChatGPT at all, John?
I don't, but I will in future.
It's very interesting. If you're going to do a Google search, often using an AI thing can be more efficient. Like if you want to say, what's the rule about such and such, about something about the election, say, what's the rule about putting up placards on lampposts during the election? Then if you go searching through things, that's quite laborious. If you ask ChatGPT, you'll get like a 2-paragraph answer that's very helpful. So increasingly people are going to use it instead of an internet search. So when it comes to the family party, increasingly, if people want to know about the family party, they'll just ask ChatGPT. And the question then is, what sources does it use? Well, the big source it uses is Wikipedia. Oh dear. The national newspaper. Oh dear. So it's a bit of a problem for us. And you would hope it would go straight to our website and look at our policies, but it tends to regard newspaper reports as the most reliable. So it will go to the Daily Records to find out what the family party is all about, rather than coming to us. But anyway, that's an issue for another day. Yeah. So right, thanks very much, John, for joining us and
you're welcome.
Making us think about those issues again. That's very helpful, and you must come on again. Thanks for watching, everyone, live and later, and we will see you next week. Right, good night.
Good night, Richard. Good night, everyone.